Hi there. So today we're going to have a look at accounting reports in Odoo. I wanted to make first an introduction video about it because you'll see that there's a lot to say about the accounting reporting. This one will be more of an introductory level, and we'll basically discover two things. We'll first have a look at some business intelligence reports in Odoo about the invoices and the analytic entries. Those are two standard business intelligence reports we can find under the accounting in Odoo. But this will be the easiest part, I think, regarding this video, because then we will have a look at the legal reporting in Odoo, and this is a bit trickier. That's why I decided to split the legal reporting topic. We'll first have an introduction today in this video, while I will create another video, I think it will be the next one, about how we can create or edit existing reports in Odoo. It will be a bit more difficult, but here at least I will explain the basic concepts of the legal reporting. So let's have a look first at the business intelligence report we can find in Odoo. You can see that here I connected to my database, and you'll have access to the business intelligence right under the reports here. You have invoices and analytic entries. Simply said, that's always the same kind of reporting capabilities that you will find here. You have first a pivot view and then a graph view, but the data that is aggregated behind is always the same. What I mean about it's always the same data that is aggregated here, I mean that for the invoice analysis, we are always going to look the information in the same tables in the database, or we could say in the same business object behind. That's why here you may see that you don't have only information about the invoice itself, but you also have here information about the partner. You have information, we can see here about the invoice, the journal that is being used, some of information about the partners again, but then you have information also about the product, or you'll see that you have information about the currencies and the currency rate. So this kind of pivot table and graph views are usually made by combining different business objects together and make it a bit more flat so that it can be used in a pivot table or a graph view. So you can see that you can do pretty much whatever you want. First by filtering, of course, but then also by grouping as you wish here, by saying, okay, I would like to have a look at all the sales for every month, but also for every sales team. And you can maybe aggregate the data or split it again, but according to different piece of information like the product. So I think that you know all of that because we have seen pivot tables in other applications, but you can see that here, of course, it exists for the invoice analysis. Of course, the same kind of information exists as well for the analytic entries, where you will have, again, a pivot table here, and you will have the ability to make some group bys according to all the information you have here regarding products, regarding sales order information, analytic accounts. So I think you know that, and that's pretty much the same information as the one you can find here under analytic entries, except that it's directly under the form of a pivot table. I would like to mention two last things before we dive into the legal reporting side of this video. Here you can see that I don't have a lot of data. If I have a look at all my invoices, you can see that I have something like 7 invoices. So of course, the invoice business intelligence is quite fast at being computed, but you'll see that even with thousands of invoices, it's really impressive. It's always fast. So at the moment, with the information that I have behind stored in my database, it may sound not impressive enough, but you'll see with your production data that it's still fast. And the second thing on which I would like to talk about is the multi-currency feature of Odoo. You may not have seen this yet because it's in another video, but you will see that it's possible to have invoices made in different currencies according to your clients, according to your needs as well. And here, usually the amounts that are displayed here are always in your own currency, which means in the user currency. So behind the scene, we compute these numbers so that you also always have a look at the information in your own currency at the rate, of course, that is computed according to the different currency rates for eventually different invoices, but that's really important to understand that here you always have a look at this information in your own currency. That being said, let's now dive into the legal reporting capabilities of Odoo. When I'm talking about legal reporting, I'm talking about everything that you can find under the reports here under legal statements. In fact, those legal statements are shipped by default in Odoo Standard, but you can improve them either by changing them yourself or by adding a new module for your specific country. You know that we have been discussing the chart of accounts and the fact that you can import all the settings for your country specifics, and it's true also for the legal statements. So you can see that here, by default, if you remember well, I installed the chart of account that's called, I think, customized chart template, and here, by default, you already have some legal statements. But let's imagine for a second that I would have installed some other country's chart of account. What would be the content of these legal statements? Well, let's give it a try. I will connect on another database right now. And you'll see that if I connect to another database here, on which I installed the Belgian accounting, you will have a bit more information. You still have the same legal statements here, but you also have Belgium statements. And in fact, some of the reports that are here are not useful anymore because those are for the customizable chart of account. But once I install the Belgian chart of account, here I have specific Belgian statements. And those are really the legal reports I would like to talk about, because usually when you install a chart of account, that is the chart of account of your country, let's have a look at all the ones that we have, you'll see that here I installed the Belgian chart of account, but you have tons of them. You have here the one about Austria, Switzerland, Bolivia. You have lots of examples here, and every chart of account will come with its own report. You'll always find the legal statement here, but those are not great for your country reports. But you will find here every time that you should have some specific statements for your country. And of course, the content of each report is not the same. Here, if I have a look at what we call bilan in French, which is the equivalent of the balance sheet, you will see that the structure is completely different. Let's click on that item, and this database is empty, so you won't see any numbers in debit, credit, and balance. But what is interesting is that you can see already that here the structure is not the same. First, of course, it's French, but then you see that the numbers that are shown are completely different as what I would get if I would go here and click on balance sheet. You see that it's not the same in its display, but also regarding the accounts that are shown here. And that's very important. In fact, every time you have your own country statements, you will see that we bring a new definition of what should be displayed for every kind of reports. Well, usually it's all about the profit and loss, the balance sheet, the tax report, and the cash flow statement. I'll stop using this database for now because I want to concentrate on the legal statement and what is, I won't say what is really standard, because the Belgian statements are standard as soon as you install the Belgian accounting, but I want to focus on things that everybody would understand here, regardless of first speaking French, of course, and regardless of the country in which you would like to make your legal statements. So I will just log out of this database and connect on the other one. Now that we are back in my previous database, let's have a look at how we could possibly change the information that is contained in those reports. You can see first that here, I told you we have different legal statements, but here some of these legal statements are always fixed, like the general ledger, which prints all of the content of the accounts, the trial balance, or the partner ledger, the age receivable and payable, but some of these reports are customizable. Let's have a look at that. If you have access to the configuration, you'll see that, yes, again, I should be in debug mode. But you will see that if you are then in debug mode and in the configuration, you will have access to the financial reports definition here, and you can see that you have access to the profit and loss, the balance sheet, the cash flow, and the executive summary here, and those can be found here under the reports, you see, so the profit and loss, the balance sheet, the cash flow, and so it means that some of the reports that are here are in fact defined here. When you click on management financial reports, you will see the definition of these reports. And you may think that, well, if there is a definition of this report, maybe I can influence the content of the report, and you would then be totally right, because here, if I have a look at the profit and loss, you would see how it is structured. We don't see that much, but before I dive into the profit and loss, let's have a look at how it is printed. If I click here on report and profit and loss, in fact I already have it. But you see that, well, we have some title, but what is really interesting is what is the content, what we have here. And you can see that first, in profit and loss, we have a division here between the income and the expense. Then in the income, we have some gross profits, some other income, and then a total. We have more or less the same here in the expenses, or on the expense side. Well, so this report, in fact, is explained in here. You see that we have a profit and loss, then we have a section that is called net profit, but if I dive into that section, we'll see, okay, we see the income and the expense, and if I want to make the comparison with the report, let's go back, and you see that, okay, we have income and expenses, and moreover, we can see that here it's completely, written in capital letters, as it is right here, and the expenses is just the starting letter is in capital letter. So you see here, the two items I have here are those two that we can see here. And the whole thing about defining here how the reports are built would be to here every time define every element that you can see in the report. Before we start changing that report and add a new element, I would like to spend some time with you on that particular screen and have a look at the different fields that we can find. You can see that first we have some main info here with a section name. It's just really the name of the item here. The code is more important because you can reuse that code later by calling this element through its code. And you can see that that's already what you can do here in the formulas, where some code here, inc and lex, are used, while we use that here, inc and lex. In fact, you will see that those are the codes of the children lines we have here. You see inc and lex. So I will talk about the computation more in depth in a few seconds, but just to let you know that those are the two codes that are used because we use the codes from the children lines. Then you have a notion of sequence, which is the order in which the elements will appear, and we have a parent notion, but here the net profit doesn't have a parent notion. You can see it here, net profit, there is no parent. In fact, it's more like it's the bottom line, it's the most important part, let's say it like that, of the report. If I go back to the profit and loss definition, the next point I would like to explain is the computation side. In fact, it's one of the most important, of course, because you are going to give a simple formula where you can compute the balance, the credit, and the debit, and say that here the balance for this element, so the balance for the net profit, should be the balance of the incomes and minus the balance of the expenses. And in fact, so I'm just explaining here that this element, net profit, so this item here at the bottom line, should be at any time the balance, which is the balance of the income minus the balance of the expenses. I don't know yet what is inside here, but I'm just saying, okay, I would like to have the net profit computed that way. And what is inside each of these inc and lex codes would be defined here in the children lines. Then we have the domain and group by fields. I won't be talking about those ones since we don't have information on this item, but I'm pretty sure that we will find by diving into the children lines some information about the domain and group by on the next elements. So let's open the income, and the first thing we can see is that we have a parent for this one, and of course the parent is the item on which we were just seconds ago. Of course, the parent is net profit for the income as we were diving into the children information. And now that we are on this child information, we can see that the formula is slightly different, of course. The section name is income. We can see that we are now here, and we are saying, well, the result of this is the aggregation of the op-in code, then the OIN code, minus the COS, so the cost of goods sold, I guess. And every time we select the balance. And again, if I want to have a look at how this is computed, I need to go into the children lines here, and I can click on the gross profit in the income. Of course, now we are here, and I can again dive into operating income, and then you can see that we have a slightly different information in terms of domain and group by. And I would like to just spend a few seconds explaining what it is. The domain is a notion that is really often used in Odoo, and it acts a bit like a filter. But a filter on what? In fact, if you remember well, we discussed in a previous video that all of the, well, maybe not all, but a good proportion of the accounting reports were based on journal entries, but more specifically to journal items. And so this domain acts on journal items. And Of course, that's not easy to decipher this part, but it means globally that we are going to take into this specific item, into the operating income, all the journal items that match this filter. And the filter would be, well, all the ones that are linked to an account that is itself linked to a user type ID, which ID would be 14. It sounds a bit difficult to understand here, but let's have a look at that when we dive from the report itself. So let's go back to our report, and you see that here we have operating income, which was the item I was having a look at, and we see that we have a domain here, and we see that here under operating income we see this account and we see a specific amount. In fact, if I want to compare what's inside this account and the domain we have here, I could go maybe rather on the journal items and check what this domain is doing. So I told you that the domain acts as a filter, and we are going to select all the journal items for which the user type of the account ID of the journal item is the ID 14. Well, the ID will be hard to find, but let's focus now on the left side here on the account ID and user type ID. Well, it's a technical name in fact, but the account ID is simply saying, okay, the account that we have here. So we saw here, I will cheat a little bit. I know the account because when I'm on my profit and loss here, I know that this is the account number. I can check for this account, okay, and see here. Well, we have just one line, so and moreover, the line here is as an amount of 200 euro, and you can see that that's indeed the amount we have here. And in fact, the domain here is saying, okay, let's select all the journal items that are linked to an account that would be, let's check, that would be linked to a user type, and this is the user type ID. To a user type that would be the ID 14. I don't know here that the ID of the income is 14, but I could check by having a look at the configuration here, account type, and see that the income here is the ID 14. I can see it in my URL. Of course, you don't see it on this video, but you can see that it's item 14 here, knowing that I didn't remove any of these account type yet, so that's correct. But this is the user type that is linked to my account, which is used on my entry, and so that's why I will here, if I again select this journal item, that's why I will have this operating income computed as the result of this computation. So I repeat quite quickly. We have seen that we dived here into the operating income, which is this item. We saw that before we had several parents, the gross profit, and then we had the income, and then we had the net profit. But all those different parent and child have different formulas, and here we have specific formulas, yes, but we also have a domain, and the domain explains which journal items I'm going to select, and the journal items are the ones that are linked to an account which is linked itself to a specific user ID, which is here I know it, but it's the income user type. And then after the domain, you can see that we have a group by, but this is easy to understand because you see that here we are grouping by accounts, and this is explained as well. If you have a look at the report, you see that here it is indeed grouped by account. So what you could do, if you want to check that this is working properly, you could be doing the following. I could be creating a new journal item, maybe a new journal entry on an account that would be slightly different. Let's create it together. Let's go here into the chart of account. Let's create a new account. I'm just giving another name, but here for the sake of the demonstration, I will say it's type of income. I save this one as well, and I will be entering some journal entry. And if I create a new journal entry, or let's reuse maybe some of the existing one through an invoice. So let's quickly create here a new invoice for which I would be targeting my new account. Okay, let's validate this one. And you'll see that if I go back in my reports, reprint my profit and loss, now we can see that we have a second account and of course an associated value. That's because simply this account is matching, well, the account and the journal item that we have are matching the filter I defined here. So we group by account ID all the accounts that are and all the journal items that are corresponding to this domain. Another thing that is really interesting here is that we have seen that we have a domain here, and if I have a look at my my gross profit, we have only 2 lines here, but maybe you had a look at the previous videos and you remember that I had other invoices. That's because the invoices were made in February, so I don't see the accounts here. But if I change the period here and I put this quarter, then you see that we have a product sales. That's because we had also this account that was targeted for several invoices, and this account is of course an account that is linked to the type income, and so all the journal entries that are linked to this account will appear here. Well, not all of them of course, but all the ones that are for this period. So that's maybe an additional comment, but everything that appears here has to respect the period that we have here and the domain that we have on the definition of the operating income here. The last thing I would like to mention about the operating income is that you will see that here we don't have any children lines. Well, that's because in fact we decided to compute based not on children element, but we decided to compute on a domain, and the domain was, as I told you, all the journal items that are linked to a specific account or a specific group of accounts here, all the accounts that are linked to this account type. But we saw that in the previous elements, like the parent, the gross profit, we decided to compute differently. So usually you will have either a domain here or children lines. You shouldn't have both. I don't think we have cases where we have both, but usually that's the way those item works. Either there is a domain or children lines. So I know that over the course of the 10 to 15 last minutes of this video, we've been focusing on something that is really maybe hard to understand here, because we have been more talking about how things work behind the scene. But I think it's important to understand how it works when you then want to understand why you have the reports being built that way. So I think it was important to have a look at that, even though we have maybe some other things to cover for this video, and maybe end on something more easier to grasp. Now that we saw that every item here was technically explained somewhere in Odoo and that you could influence that, let's talk a bit about the reports that you have here in standard and the different filters that you have here above. We discussed the fact that you have the P&L, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement here. We saw under, I think it was the P&L, yeah. We saw in the P&L that we could change the account here, maybe by creating new accounts and giving it a proper type. But we saw also that we could change some information here. I didn't spend a lot of time explaining that while I was explaining more technically how this was computed. But of course, when you have reports in Odoo, you may change the period on which you would like to display those reports. You have some specific dates, like this month, this quarter, or this financial year, or last financial year, that are available, but you have also custom dates here so that you can really define the dates that you want. You'll see that you can compare eventually with different periods or same period of last year. Here, as I don't have a lot of information for last year, it wouldn't make sense. And then you can select if you want to have the report either based on an accrual basis or cash basis. And you can select that you want to see the unposted entries in the accounting. So that's really interesting to change those settings here. And of course, you can also export or print the same information as the one you have here. And of course, you have this capability on all the different reports. So here I was on the profit and loss, and you see that here you also have those buttons on the balance sheet and on the cash flow statement. And the same options here at the top of the page are always available. So we've seen so much stuff today in this video that I will have to stop, but I would like first to make a small summary of what we saw in this video. First, we had a look at some business intelligence here. We saw the invoices and the analytic entries. I explained a bit how this works, but then we spend most of our time explaining how the legal statements are created. We saw that some of the legal statements here are in fact defined here once you are in debug mode, you could have access to the definition of these reports under financial report here. We saw also how these reports were built, so the structure, but also the way each items are computed here. I know it was a bit technical, but I think it was worth mentioning that here the reports have a definition that you can influence. And then we saw that you had some options here on each of the reports that are available in Odoo. I didn't spend a lot of time explaining the content of the report because here every report for every chart of account will be different. So I prefer to stay generic here, explain that of course you have every time the same kind of legal statements depending on your country, but I wanted to explain especially how this works behind the scene. So that's it, my congratulations, because we saw a lot of things today. The next video will be about the creation of a new report in Odoo. So that's why we covered so much today about the reporting capabilities and how the reports were built. So we'll see how we can this time create a new report that would be exactly what you need in Odoo.